Metal screams when it meets fire. Then it yields, becomes something better, stronger. I've spent 40 years at this forge, watching raw material transform under my hammer, just like my father before me and his father before him. The scars on my hands tell that story better than words ever could. My name is Nelson Forge. I'm 53 years old, and in Iron Haven, Pennsylvania, the Forge family has shaped metal since before the town even had its name. The rhythmic clang of my hammer striking the anvil echoes through our valley like a heartbeat. The early October morning chill cut through my workshop as I stoked the forge fire higher. My apprentice Liam was late again, probably because of that redhead he'd been seeing. Young love makes men careless. I'd been young once too, though not careless even then. Morning, Mr. Forge. Liam burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold or from rushing, it didn't matter which. You're 20 minutes behind, I said, not looking up from the cherry-red metal I was working. Which means you're staying 20 minutes late. The Richardson order needs to be finished today. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. The boy pulled on his heavy apron, grabbed a pair of tongs. He was a good kid, strong back, steady hands. Reminded me of myself at that age. How's Joanna? Liam asked after we'd settled into our rhythm. Still volunteering at the hospital? My hammer paused mid-swing. Joanna, my wife of 20 years. The question shouldn't have given me pause, but lately, little things have been piling up. The new clothes. The unfamiliar perfume. The hospital committee meetings that kept her out later and later. She's fine, I said, bringing the hammer down with more force than necessary. The metal protested, sparks flying. Liam sensed the change in mood, fell silent. Smart boy. At noon, my sister Martha showed up with lunch, same as she'd done every Thursday since Joanna started volunteering. Martha was 3 years older, had more opinions than was good for anyone, and had never much cared for Joanna. You look tired, she said, setting down a paper bag with sandwiches from the diner. I'm fine. I wiped my hands on a rag, black with soot. Martha's eyes narrowed. That wife of yours working late again tonight? I gave her a look that would have silenced most people. Martha wasn't most people. Don't give me that look, Nelson. I saw her yesterday, coming out of Milligan's department store with bags I know you didn't pay for. Unless you've suddenly developed an interest in women's scarves. What's your point, Martha? I unwrapped my sandwich, roast beef with horseradish, the way I'd eaten it since high school. My point is, the new doctor at community hospital seems to have the same taste in scarves. Bought one for his mother last week, according to Debbie at the register. Martha took a bite of her own lunch, watching me closely. Joanna works with the hospital foundation. She probably got a discount. But even as I said it, something cold settled in my gut. Maybe. Martha shrugged. Or maybe you ought to pay more attention to what's happening right under your nose. After she left, I returned to the forge, worked the metal harder than usual. Liam kept glancing at me, nervous. Something wrong, Mr. Forge? Nothing that concerns you. I plunged the metal into water, steam hissing up like anger given form. Focus on your work. When I got home that night, Joanna's car wasn't in the driveway. The house was dark except for the porch light. On the kitchen counter was a note, emergency foundation meeting. Don't wait up. Love you. I stood there, note in hand, listening to the empty house. 20 years of marriage, 2 children now off at college, and suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own home. I folded the note carefully, placed it in my wallet, next to the receipt I'd found in her coat pocket last week, for lunch at a place we'd never been to together. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Not for Joanna to come home, but for the right moment to strike. It was past midnight when I heard Joanna's car pull into the driveway. I'd moved to my workshop in the back of the house, nursing my second whiskey while oiling tools that didn't need oiling. The door opened, her keys jingled in the ceramic bowl by the door, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. Nelson? You still up? She appeared in the doorway, surprise evident on her face. She wore a blue dress I didn't recognize, a thin silver necklace I'd never bought her. Her blonde curls were more styled than a foundation meeting would warrant. Just finishing up. I set down the wrench I'd been working on. How was the emergency? Exhausting. She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. The spring fundraiser is a mess. Dr. Wells thinks we need to completely restructure our approach. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a tell I'd noticed over the years whenever she wasn't being entirely truthful. Dr. Wells. I kept my voice neutral. The new guy? Preston. Yes. He's head of the foundation now. She yawned, too deliberately. I'm going to shower and head to bed. You coming soon? I nodded, said nothing. She hesitated, like she might say more, then turned and disappeared down the hallway. Minutes later, I heard the shower running. Joanna's purse sat on the kitchen counter where she dropped it. I'm not proud of what I did next, but when a man spent his life building something, he protects it. Her phone was easy to find, unlocked with our anniversary date, 0522, which struck me as both ironic and convenient. The message notification lit up the screen. Amazing tonight. Same time Thursday. From PW Foundation. A foundation that needed an emergency meeting on a Tuesday night, and again on Thursday. I placed the phone exactly as I'd found it, finished my whiskey, and went to bed. Joanna was already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, planning my next move. The following morning at the forge, I couldn't focus. Twice I nearly burned myself, something that hadn't happened in 20 years. Mr. Forge, you want me to take over that piece? Liam's concern was evident, but I waved him off. I need air, I said, setting down my tools. Mind the forge. I walked to Ray Moonfeather's shop at the edge of town. Despite the ridiculous name he'd chosen after his military service, Ray was the most clear-eyed man I knew. He sold handmade furniture and dispensed advice that was usually worth hearing. Nelson Forge, he nodded as I entered his shop. I was wondering when you'd show up. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He gestured to a chair across from his workbench. Small town. People talk. Not to you, of course. No one would dare. I'm not here for gossip, Ray. No, you're here because you finally noticed what everyone's been too respectful to tell you. He set down his sandpaper, fixed me with a steady gaze. You're Joanna and the new doctor. My jaw clenched. How long? 2 months, give or take. Ray shrugged. Started right after the summer festival. They're not as discreet as they think. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have put me through that wall? He nodded toward the solid oak behind me. He had a point. My temper was legendary, though rarely seen. I controlled it, like I controlled the fire in my forge, useful when directed, dangerous when loose. What would you do, Ray? Me. He picked up his sandpaper again, resumed his work. I'd gather evidence. I'd be strategic. And then I'd confront, not in anger, but with purpose. Like you did with Helen? Ray's wife had left him for a car salesman 15 years ago. He'd handled it with a dignity that surprised everyone. Helen made her choice. I made mine. He looked up. Just remember, Nelson, whatever you decide to do, this town respects you. Don't lose that respect by losing control. I left Ray's shop with a clearer head. That evening, the Iron Haven Community Hospital was hosting a fundraiser dinner at the town hall. Joanna had mentioned it weeks ago. I'd planned to beg off, claim too much work. Now, I found myself putting on my one good suit, the one Joanna had bought me for our 20th anniversary. You're coming after all? Joanna's surprise was genuine as I appeared downstairs, dressed and ready. Thought I should support my wife's work. I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Meet the famous Dr. Wells. The town hall was decorated with white streamers and twinkling lights. Joanna was immediately swept into a group of volunteers, leaving me at the bar with a scotch and a clear view of the room. It didn't take long to spot him. Dr. Preston Wells, tall and lean, his tailored suit worth more than a month of my earnings. He laughed easily, touched people's arms when he spoke to them, exuded the confident charm of a man used to getting what he wanted. When he spotted Joanna across the room, his expression changed slightly, a look I recognized because I'd once worn it myself. Hunger. Possession. Mine. I drained my scotch, set the glass down harder than necessary. The doctor's eyes flicked toward me, then widened slightly in recognition. Joanna must have pointed me out to him before. He excused himself from his conversation and headed my way, hand extended. Mr. Forge, I presume? I've heard so much about you. Preston Wells. I shook his hand, felt the softness of his palm against my calloused one. Doctor. Heard a lot about you too. Wells' smile faltered under my grip, just slightly. Quite a handshake you've got there. Blacksmith, I said, releasing him. Works the muscles. Joanna appeared at his side, eyes darting nervously between us. I see you two have met. Just getting acquainted, I said. Throughout the evening, I watched them, the careful distance they maintained in public, the brief glances when they thought no one was looking. I'd seen enough. The next morning, I called the one person who could help me without judgment. About time, Martha said when I told her. I've been keeping notes. Dates, times, that fancy apartment building on Westfield where he lives. The overlook? Penthouse floor. A doorman named Harold works weekdays. He's seen Joanna there. After Martha left, I drove to the overlook, found Harold easily, older man, military bearing, well-groomed mustache. Mr. Peterson? I approached him directly. Nelson Forge. I understand my wife visits Dr. Wells here. His professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Forge, I'm not here to make a scene. I need information. He studied me, then nodded. Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually between 1 and 4. Sometimes weekends when the doctor's not on call. He lowered his voice. I don't like it either, sir. My wife left me for my best friend 30 years ago. Never right. What they're doing. I slipped him my card with $50. If anything changes in their routine, call me. Back at the forge, I focused on work, waiting. Liam noticed something was off but knew better than to ask. He'd returned from a delivery to the hospital with unexpected information. Dr. Wells was showing off some fancy letter opener to the nurses, he said. Said it was handmade by the best blacksmith in the state. Looked like your work to me. The letter opener. Joanna had commissioned it as a thank you gift for the hospital director last month. I'd spent days on it, incorporating the medical caduceus into the design. That night, I moved methodically through our home office, checking phone records, credit card statements. Joanna had grown careless, restaurant charges for 2 at times she claimed to be at meetings, a hotel charge from a weekend conference in Pittsburgh. I made copies of everything, stored them in my workshop safe, created a new checking account at a different bank, changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance. All the while, I maintained our routine, dinner conversations about normal things, mechanical kisses goodnight. Joanna seemed relieved by my apparent obliviousness, grew bolder in her lies. I was tempering myself like steel, heating, cooling, strengthening, preparing for the moment I would strike. 2 weeks of gathering evidence was enough. On Tuesday morning, I called in sick to my own forge for the first time in 15 years. Liam could handle the day's orders. I drove to community hospital just before lunch, parked where Joanna wouldn't notice my truck, and waited. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mr. Forge, are you here to see Dr. Williams about your shoulder? No, ma'am. Dr. Wells, actually. Personal matter. Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. He's between appointments. 3rd floor, East Wing. Wells looked up from his desk when I knocked, surprise turning quickly to wariness. Mr. Forge, this is unexpected. I closed his office door behind me. Thought we should talk, man to man. I have patience in 10 minutes, he said, glancing at his watch. This won't take long. I remained standing, reached into my jacket pocket, and placed the letter opener, the one I'd crafted with my own hands, on his desk. Quality work, wouldn't you say? Made to last generations. His face drained of color. Nelson, you've been sleeping with my wife for 4 months. Tuesdays, Thursdays, sometimes weekends at your place. Once at the Parkview Hotel in Pittsburgh. My voice remained steady, factual. The doorman at your building has been very helpful. So have the phone records, credit card statements, and hotel receipts. Wells stood abruptly. Listen, this isn't what you think. Sit down. The words came out quiet but with the force of a hammer striking. He sat. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end it. Today. You're going to tell her it's over, and that you've been seeing someone else. Make her hate you. Make it clean. And if I don't? A flash of defiance, quickly extinguished by my next words. Then every board member of this hospital receives copies of your explicit text messages to my wife, sent during surgical hours. Your ex-wife gets evidence of your affair for her alimony reconsideration. And the police get the prescription pad I found in Joanna's purse with your unauthorized signature on it. His face went from white to gray. You're bluffing. I placed a sealed envelope on his desk. Open it. Inside were copies of everything. Texts, timestamps during his documented surgeries, the prescription pad. I hadn't known about the surgeries until I'd researched his schedule online. The prescription pad was luck, found while searching Joanna's things. Jesus Christ, he whispered. You have until 5 o'clock. After that, these go out. I turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The letter opener? Poor craftsmanship. The balance is off. I left him sitting there, walked calmly through the hospital, nodded at staff who knew me. Outside, I took a deep breath of crisp October air. Phase 1 complete. I spent the afternoon at the bank, changing access to our main accounts, then at our lawyer's office updating our will. By 4:30, I was home, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder in front of me. At 4:52, Joanna burst through the front door, mascara streaking her cheeks. She froze when she saw me sitting there. You're home early, she managed. So are you. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, Joanna. I don't feel well. I need to lie down. Sit down. The edge in my voice must have registered because she complied instantly. I opened the folder, slid the first photo across the table, her car in the Overlook's parking garage, timestamped 2 weeks ago. Let's not waste time with denials. Her hand went to her mouth. Nelson. 20 years. I laid out more evidence methodically. 20 years, and you throw it away for a man who couldn't even properly appreciate the quality of my work. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Then understanding. Then fear. What did you do to him? She whispered. I didn't touch him. Didn't have to. I closed the folder. He ended things today, didn't he? Probably said he's been seeing someone else. A sob escaped her. How did you know? Because I told him to. I stood up. Pack a bag. You're staying at Martha's tonight. Tomorrow, we'll discuss separation terms. Nelson, please, we can work through this. The time was before you started sleeping with my wife, not after. Joanna flinched at my words. How could you be so cold? This isn't you, Nelson. No, Joanna. This is exactly who I am. The man who built this life brick by brick. The man who won't stand by while someone takes a sledgehammer to it. I checked my watch. You have 30 minutes to pack essentials. Anything else you need, you can arrange to collect when I'm at the forge. I left her sobbing at the table and went to make a call. Our children needed to hear this from me first, not through town gossip. James answered on the third ring. Dad? Everything okay? You never call on weekdays. I need you and Gloria to come home this weekend. Family meeting. A pause. Is it Mom? Is she sick? Your mother is fine. I'll explain everything when you're both here. I could hear the concern in his voice, but he didn't press. Okay. We'll be there Friday night. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. I worked longer hours at the forge, hammering metal with a focus that bordered on fury. Joanna stayed at Martha's, called twice daily, messages I didn't return. When the gossip inevitably started, Harold the doorman had apparently shared our conversation with his poker buddies. Customers at the forge pretended not to notice anything amiss. Liam was the only one who dared mention it. Mr. Forge, if you need anything, my dad went through something similar when I was a kid. I paused mid-strike, set down my hammer. I appreciate that, Liam, but this isn't something that's happening to me. It's something I'm handling. Friday evening, James and Gloria arrived within an hour of each other. James drove up from Penn State where he was studying engineering, Gloria from Pittsburgh where she'd started pre-law. They looked so grown now, James with my build and his mother's eyes, Gloria with her mother's curls but my stubbornness. Neither had brought laundry or asked for money. Somehow, that detail hit me harder than anything else. Where's Mom? Gloria asked as we sat down for the dinner I'd prepared, Martha's lasagna recipe, reheated. She's staying with your Aunt Martha for now. I asked her to give us this evening alone. I took a breath. I have something difficult to tell you both. I laid out the facts without embellishment or accusation. Their mother had been having an affair with Dr. Wells. I had evidence. We would be separating. Divorce proceedings would begin next month. Jesus, Dad. James pushed his plate away. How are you so calm about this? Because falling apart won't solve anything. Gloria, always quicker to emotion, had tears streaming down her face. Did you confront her? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. It was a 4-month choice she made every Tuesday and Thursday. I passed them each a folder. I don't show you this to hurt you, but you deserve the truth. Your mother will try to explain it away. She'll make herself the victim. I want you to know exactly what happened. They looked through the evidence silently. James' jaw tightened with each page. Gloria's tears dried up, replaced by something harder. Does everyone in town know? She finally asked. Some. More will. Small towns have big ears. I met their eyes. How you handle this with your mother is your choice. I won't ask you to cut her off or take sides, but I won't pretend this didn't happen either. James stood abruptly. I need some air. He strode out the back door. Through the window, I could see him pacing in the yard, phone in hand. He's calling Mom, Gloria said quietly. I know. Are you really going to divorce her? After 23 years? Yes. Because you can't forgive her? Or because you don't want to? I considered my daughter's question carefully. Because some things, once broken, can't be made whole again. Not in the same way. Gloria nodded slowly. Like when you try to reheat metal that's already been forged. Exactly like that. Pride flickered through the storm of emotions. She'd been listening all those years I'd explained my craft. The weekend unfolded in painful stages. Joanna came by Saturday morning, seeking forgiveness from the children. James couldn't look at her. Gloria tried to mediate, always the peacemaker, until Joanna suggested that perhaps I had driven her to the affair by being emotionally unavailable. Bullshit, Gloria had snapped, shocking us all. Dad worked 60-hour weeks to put us through college without debt. Don't you dare blame him for your choices. By Sunday night, the family had fractured along new fault lines. The children returned to school with promises to visit me soon. Joanna moved into a small apartment near the hospital. Dr. Wells, I heard through town gossip, had requested an immediate transfer to a hospital in Ohio. The forge became my sanctuary. I poured every ounce of anger, betrayal, and pain into my work. Orders that normally took a week were completed in days. Word spread, both of my situation and of the exceptional quality of work coming out of my shop. Business doubled, then tripled. 1 month after the separation, I hired 2 more apprentices to help Liam manage the workload. 6 weeks after, I bought the vacant storefront next door to expand the forge. The irony wasn't lost on me, my personal life in ashes while my business rose like a phoenix. 14 months after Joanna walked out of our house, I stood in the expanded forge watching Liam teach our newest apprentice how to properly heat-treat carbon steel. My back was stronger, my arms harder, my mind clearer than they'd been in years. "Mr. Forge, the Caulfield order is ready for inspection," called Mike, the second apprentice I'd hired. The business now employed 5 people besides myself. The irony wasn't lost on me, being left had somehow made me more. The divorce had finalized 6 months prior. Joanna got the house, which I'd already emotionally vacated, and I kept the business. The terms were cleaner than I expected. Joanna's shame had made her amenable to a quick resolution. Word around town was that Dr. Wells had left her shortly after moving to Ohio, his transfer request citing personal reasons that everyone understood to mean he'd gotten what he wanted and moved on. Joanna had tried to return to her volunteer work at the hospital, but the cold shoulders and whispered comments eventually drove her to a part-time bookkeeping job at the lumber yard on the edge of town. She'd called me twice in the past year, once drunk, begging forgiveness, once sober, asking if we could be friends for the sake of the children. I declined both offers with the same even tone I'd used when confronting her affair. "Dad, we're here." James's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He and Gloria stood in the doorway, home for Thanksgiving break. Behind them was Grace-Chin, Gloria's roommate who had nowhere to go for the holiday. "Mr. Forge, your work is incredible," Grace said, eyes wide as she took in the forge. "Gloria talks about you all the time." That evening, the 4 of us sat around the table in my new apartment above the expanded forge. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter I hadn't heard in my home for years. "Dad's seeing someone," Gloria announced suddenly, eyes twinkling. "Mrs. Wilson from the library," Liam told me. I nearly choked on my beer. "Liam needs to mind his own business." "Well, are you?" James pressed. "We've had coffee. Twice." "Dad." Both children grinned. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, I stood at the window overlooking Main Street. 1 year ago, I thought my life had ended. Now I can see it had simply been reforged stronger at the broken places, tempered by fire, made into something new and unexpectedly better. 5 years changes a man, or perhaps reveals who he truly was all along. I stood at the forge, guiding my grandson's small hands as they held the hammer. "Steady, Michael. Let the weight do the work." At 4 years old, he was too young for real smithing, but old enough to learn respect for the craft. James watched from the doorway, pride evident in his stance. "He's got your eye for detail," James said. Already corrected me on the difference between Damascus and pattern-welded steel. Forge & Son had become Forge & Sons 2 years ago when James decided engineering design wasn't as satisfying as creating with his hands. The business now occupied half a block of Main Street, with orders coming in from across the country. The History Channel had even featured us in a documentary about American craftsmanship. Gloria practiced law one town over, specializing in divorce settlements that didn't leave good men gutted. She'd been inspired, she told me, by watching how I'd handled myself. With dignity and strategy, she'd said at her law school graduation dinner. "The way every man should." The bell above the door chimed. Eleanor Wilson, now Eleanor Forge for the past 3 years, walked in with lunch for everyone. "There's my boys," she said, ruffling Michael's hair. Eleanor had been a widow, understood loss, valued straightforward strength. Our relationship had none of the drama that had characterized my first marriage, just mutual respect and genuine affection. "Mail came," she said, handing me an envelope. Return address, Meadow Glen Assisted Living, 2 counties over. Inside was a short note and a check. Joanna's tight handwriting, more cramped than I remembered, filled half a page with request for forgiveness, news of her declining health, and a final admission that she'd ruined the best thing in her life. The check was for $20,000 for the grandchildren's education, she wrote. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket. The Joanna who had betrayed me was as distant a memory as last winter's snow. Whatever remained of her now sick, regretful, alone, held no power over the life I'd built from the ashes she'd left. Important? Eleanor asked, one eyebrow raised. No, I said, and meant it. Just ghosts. That evening, our expanded family gathered around the table Eleanor had insisted we needed when we married, big enough for future grandchildren, she'd said. Liam and his wife sat across from James and Grace, who had been married last spring. Gloria and her fiancé discussed their upcoming wedding. The house hummed with conversation, warmth, and the solid certainty of people who knew their place in the world. Later, after everyone had gone, I built a fire in the backyard pit. Eleanor brought out the note from Joanna. Watch as I considered it one last time. You don't owe her anything, she said. Not even your anger. I know. I tossed the paper into the flames, watched it curl and blacken. The check I'd already torn up and scattered into the wind. My grandchildren would never need money from the woman who'd tried to destroy their grandfather. As the fire consumed the last of Joanna's words, I felt the final weight lift. I had built this life, this business, this family, this legacy, through the strength of my hands and the steel of my resolve. In the end, her betrayal had forged me into the man I was meant to be all along. Eleanor's hand found mine in the darkness. We stood together, watching the embers glow against the night sky. Fire destroys, but it also purifies. It burns away weakness, leaves only what matters. What remained was mine.